for any such tools in the archaeological record, nor any record of them in these civilizations' own histories. Is it possible that these objects are far older and that the history of civilization on this planet is longer than we ever believed? Could the ancients, at least as we know them, have inherited some of these artifacts and architecture? Could they have found them to be sacred, incorporated them into their cultures, and used them for ritual or for ceremony? After all, our own modern civilization has inherited the very same objects, and we still find them to be sacred. We still use them for ceremony, even today. The technology that's evident in this type of stonework is generally dismissed as mostly irrelevant by mainstream archaeology, yet it's frequently found to be utterly remarkable by anyone with an open mind and the will to apply a basic analysis of the engineering principles that must have been used in their construction. Many researchers and experts from the past couple of centuries have done just this, and they often report being utterly awestruck by these ancient accomplishments, and left wondering just how Bronze Age or other relatively primitive cultures managed such feats. From the luminary Sir Flinders Petrie in the 1800s, one of the very first to apply engineering principles to the evidence for precision stonework in ancient Egypt, to a long list of modern engineers like Christopher Dunn, stonemasons like Yusuf Aylin, architects like Randall Carlson, and many other researchers, all with
who are you?
construction techniques. They all find it very difficult to reconcile these achievements with the known capability of the ancient cultures our academics insist.
Welcome. You followed my stream before. I remember you, Donna Titus.
Out of place objects, and that they require a level of technology that is far beyond that of the cultures that we attribute them to. Along with my own observations, my own travels, it is on this basis, on the opinion of a long list of qualified experts, and not those of mainstream archaeology or anthropology, that I too believe this category of stonework to be evidence for unknown and ancient forms of high technology. On topics like precision engineering, tool making, and large-scale construction, it's these people we should turn to for truly expert opinion, rather than those of tenured academics who write textbooks about the people, practices, traditions, and the daily life of ancient cultures. Archaeologists don't tend to write books about precision engineering, and it by no means degrades the profession by saying that many of its members generally have only a limited interest and certainly no professional expertise in construction technologies. Even when the engineering or technological aspects of objects are addressed by mainstream archaeology, it's always cast in the light of the known capability of ancient civilizations, often leading to circular logic that goes nowhere. Something like this, an example. The Old Kingdom granite monoliths like columns and boxes must have been made by copper chisels and pounding stones, because that's what we know that they had. There's no proof they did it any differently. Meanwhile, analysis of the objects themselves and the technology needed to make them is direct evidence for such an advanced capability. After all, we have the objects, which is the result of the tools, and we have the markings, which is the signature from the tools. Yet this evidence is dismissed because there have been no tools found. Therefore, the Egyptians must have made them with copper chisels and pounding stones, because that's what we know that they had. It's a circular argument, and it's a neat way of avoiding addressing the actual evidence for precision and high technology in these ancient objects. Just ask, where are the tools, and walk away. Never mind the quantifiable proof that we have of their use that is represented by the objects themselves. This is why archaeologists rarely consider the manufacturing of such precision objects, because the answers risk upsetting the status quo of the story of history.
If you're asking about the analysis of the inside of the vases, we only dealt with the contents. We haven't worked on the techniques used to make the vases.
I had the profile picture of me with a white shirt and the blue water background and sunglasses, blue sunglasses.
Many mainstream archaeologists and anthropologists are deeply vested in maintaining this story.
Yeah, I changed my profile picture recently.
They derive their academic power and authority as the experts on this story and of all of its aspects. The motive to protect it and to resist change is somewhat understandable, if admittedly frustrating at times. limitations of just what ancient high technology could mean, and statements or terms like this get thrown around quite a lot. In my case, it's pretty specific. I'm talking about the evidence for technology that is not explainable by the tools found in the archaeological record, nor is it explainable by what we know of the capabilities of ancient civilizations. I'm not talking about lasers or spacecraft or mystical energies and crystals. I'm talking about the verifiable and measurable evidence of advanced tooling and machining of very hard types of stone, and the advanced construction methodologies that must have been used in the creation of various forms of ancient megalithic architecture or artifacts. This evidence isn't in every part of ancient civilizations, in fact, far from it. And one of the distinguishing factors that I'll illustrate in this video is exactly this point, that quite often this evidence, all these objects, stand out in stark contrast to the relatively primitive levels of technology in the ancient work that's around them, or even on them, as is the case for much of the hieroglyphs that have been badly scratched into precision-made objects like the boxes and statues from ancient Egypt. I also want to state why I think this set of evidence is important, as it goes against the narrative of the development of civilization as we know it. It's an important part of framing the wider argument that for a re-evaluation of the roots of human civilization, with the idea that we've both risen high and been struck down by catastrophe before. I've got specific videos on several of the other aspects to this argument, things like the Younger Dryas cataclysm, the extension of the human timeline, or even what the ancients themselves said about their own origins. Both the ancient Egyptians and Sumerians trace their civilizations back tens of thousands of years further than we give them credit for, and you would be hard-pressed to find any ancient culture that didn't have fire, flood, or cataclysm myths in their own origin stories. Events that their advanced gods or ancestors barely lived through, and because of them were forced to restart civilization again. Modern science is validating the evidence for catastrophism and the grains of truth.
My JP also came in. I have my JP. I unlocked Aztec the other night, so I might play tomorrow.
Been truly felt when it comes to the cultural implications and the soft sciences of history or archaeology.
With the 1980s, what we see is this acceptance of catastrophism in Earth history, right? And so that by the time we get to the turning of the millennium, right, by the year 2000, catastrophism is now pretty much an accepted paradigm in Earth history, but not necessarily in human history. This is now, I would say, is the next evolutionary development in catastrophism, is recognizing its role in our human story on Earth. And that leads us directly into the issue of why, for example, we don't find that hard evidence for ancient advanced technological civilizations that the critics are so insistent upon requiring, you see. But what they don't understand, and this has become clear to me talking to them, reading their stuff, seeing them, on various venues, is that they don't understand the scale of these global events. Right. They don't understand how extreme the Younger Dryas event and associated foreshocks and aftershocks really were.
I think this evidence for ancient high technology is a vital piece of the overall argument for a re-evaluation of human history and our origins. And to me, it's an indicator for a past that is both longer and far more complex than the one we generally accept. You know, the one that says human civilization only really began around 6,000 years ago. Even saying that at this point sounds a little bit ridiculous to me, but that is indeed still the orthodox position. Without derailing this video, I do want to make a point here, as I'm sure some of you might be thinking, hang on, hasn't the discovery and dating of Göbekli Tepe with its 11,000-year-old radiocarbon dating and deliberate burial, hasn't this pushed back the date for human civilization? You would think so, and I and many others certainly think so, but if you follow the mainstream debate, such as it is, or if you look up the entry for Göbekli Tepe on that bastion of establishment groupthink that is Wikipedia, you'll find that the site is still attributed to Neolithic hunter-gatherer cultures. Mainstream archaeology, you see, rather than risk being about their precious story of history, a story from which derives all of their academic authority and tenure, simply changed their definition of what it means to be a hunter-gatherer. As if one of the largest megalithic sites in the world, with hundreds of expertly made pillars and stone circles, with individual pillars ranging from 10 to 50 tons in weight, as if all of this was made by nomadic tribes of loincloth-wearing savages as some sort of weekend hobby. You know, the boys get together, go camping, get away from the kids, do a bit of rock carving, that type of thing. It's ridiculous. The site obviously requires real civilization to have been built. It obviously requires decades of training and expertise for the quarrying, shaping, and the artwork wrought in the stone. It obviously needed a large population base and diversified, organized culture in order to support such activity. We now know that Göbekli Tepe may have represented something even more important and more profound. Its artwork seems to represent a dating system, and might contain a record of the Younger Dryas cataclysm itself, along with other cosmic events of the time. Dr. Martin Sweatman, author of Prehistory Decoded, has discovered a strong link between the artwork at Göbekli Tepe and the alignment of constellations going back in time, including what seems to be a connection to the Younger Dryas comets or cosmic bodies themselves. I've interviewed Martin on this channel, and he has an excellent series of videos on his YouTube channel for anyone that's interested in his work or the science behind the Younger Dryas in general. There's some links to those below, or you could just buy his book. I think that the late Klaus Schmidt, who was the director for the excavation at Göbekli Tepe for many years, I think that he knew that this site represented civilization, but he was very cautious to not risk his archaeological career by coming out and challenging the status quo story of history with a direct claim against it. Instead, he said that it represented a transition from hunter-gatherers to an agricultural society, which to my mind is a roundabout way of calling it civilization. Such is the state of modern archaeology. When new ideas or new data challenge the status quo, things like the evidence for the Younger Dryas, or for unexplainable high technology, or even the things ancient cultures said about their own ancestors, these ideas are first ignored, then they're attacked, mostly by attacking the man and not the argument. If attacking the argument fails, then the context around the evidence is twisted, such that it becomes essentially meaningless to the narrative of history. Just look at the treatment Graham Hancock has received by academia.
Yo, RN Barra, what's up, man?
The crime of successfully raising
RN
such
to B,
ideas
Barra.
and opening so many
RN to
minds
B, what's up,
across the
man?
world. Most recently, he was the
How you doing, man?
subject of a full 27
Can you hear me if I talk like this? Not much, just chilling? Cool, man. Is the video too loud, or volume's good? I got a big, huge fan off. Day off, that's cool, man. Nice.
These articles are mostly aimed at Hancock's new book,
Sir, day off, just chilling. Thanks, buddy.
Of his arguments head on, they seek to reset the context around it,
Thanks,
framing
man.
it all as some sort of fringe esoteric tradition, not worthy of serious consideration. Invoking Bigfoot, ancient aliens, Atlantis, and all number of things that have really nothing to do with Hancock's book, the articles attempt to discredit anything that wasn't written from within the safe spaces of tenured academia as pseudoscience or pseudo-archaeology.
Pretty good, man.
Not only that, but
we go.
Hoops also sees fit to attach the worst type of modern dog-whistling calls for outrage to Hancock's work and to the entire field of non-mainstream history research. I was genuinely appalled when I read this, and I felt the need to deconstruct these articles and their logical fallacies in some depth on one of my recent live streams, and there's a link to that one below. Hoops and his establishment crowd have also been actively working on social media to discredit the Younger Dryas cosmic impact hypothesis as nothing more than the recycling of ancient esoteric comet myths or catastrophist books from the 1800s, written well before the concept of plate tectonics was even known. Yes, people have been talking about comets for a long time, and for good reason, just ask the dinosaurs. But accounts from the past have nothing to do with the modern scientific work that's uncovering the truth of the Younger Dryas event. Hoops chooses to completely ignore the now hundreds of scientific, peer-reviewed papers that have come out since 2007 when the theory was first proposed. And in doing so, he discredits the many dozens of qualified scientists that are behind that work. George Howard and Mark Young have put together a comprehensive list of all of of the scientific papers surrounding the Younger Dryas cosmic impact. It's in a bibliography on the Cosmic Tusk website. And that's all the bibliography is. It's a list with links to the individual papers. It includes the papers for the impact hypothesis, which is the majority of papers, and it also includes those against it or critical of the theory. Despite not being involved in any of these papers, nor even in the scientific disciplines that are mostly behind them, Hoops insists on calling this bibliography biased, and from his high seat of academic tenure vocally and repeatedly recommends that, instead of looking at the scientific evidence, the public should only read the entry about the Younger Dryas cosmic impact that is on Wikipedia, as he claims this to be a truly unbiased source. It may not come as a surprise that this Wikipedia entry also strays far from the scientific literature. It invokes Graham Hancock, Ignatius Donnelly, and it suggests the whole theory is a recycled idea from so-called fringe authors, and it only barely stops short of calling the whole thing pseudoscience. Perhaps it says this because it's Professor Hoops himself that has been writing this article. Just click on the revision history of the document on Wikipedia and the proof is right there. It's brazen, I'll give him that, but he really must think that the general public like you and me are pretty stupid, because I don't think I could find a better example of academic establishment bias than this. In another recent live stream, I dug into the history of this document, and George Howard has a great new article up on the Cosmic Tusk that shows just how John Hoops has been trying to discredit the Younger Dryas cosmic impact. Links to both of those are below. Sadly, this isn't an isolated example of establishment bias and manipulation that gets employed in order to maintain the status quo of history. In my documentary on the ancient Egyptian tube drills, I showed how Christopher Dunn confirmed the claims of Flinders Petrie, claims for a spiral groove on the famous drill core number 7, and these grooves indicate advanced technology, and these grooves were both measured and confirmed by Dunn with modern tools. I also show how Dunn exposed the entire establishment argument against Petrie's claim, boiling down to some deliberately manipulated and tilted photographs in a textbook. These photographs were tilted in order to make the groove look horizontal on the page rather than spiral. This actually gets quoted as an authoritative source in other mainstream textbooks. You see, we just can't have new discoveries or scientific evidence upsetting the mainstream narrative. Wikipedia pages get edited, photographs get tilted, and Göbekli Tepe was nothing more than a weekend playground for bored hunter-gatherers. Okay, derailing over. Let's get down to some examples of ancient high technology. I've grouped these examples into categories, and this will be a two-part video in order to cover as many of them as I can, and I want to start with the evidence for machining. By this term, I mean the marks and indications of advanced tools that have been used to cut or shape stone blocks and objects, and these tools are definitely not found in the archaeological record. The examples take the form of saw cuts and machining marks, and tube drill holes and cores, striations and lines of varying fineness that indicate degrees of machining. Many of the objects with such marks come from sites known to exist during the Old Kingdom period of ancient Egypt, or from other parts of the world that also had an equivalent Bronze Age technology, typically with no access to iron or steel tools. The tools that are found that come from these periods are primitive hand tools, flint knives, copper or bronze chisels, adzes or stone pounders. These do not produce machining marks, and clearly none of them were mechanized or powered. What's more, the Old Kingdom was not thought to have had access to the wheel, yet in many Old Kingdom locations we can see the evidence for precise and powerful tools that certainly operated on principles involving the wheel, and that seem to have cut through incredibly tough material like granite, diorite or basalt with seeming ease. Some of these machining marks left consistent and measurable arcs that we can use to estimate the saw's size, and these tools must have been truly monstrous. They must also have been powered by some mechanism. Perhaps my favourite example of what must have been just a huge circular saw, or perhaps a swing saw, is found at the Old Kingdom site of Abu Sir. This megalithic block of basalt that sits in front of one of the several pyramids on that site looks much like many others that are found here, yet a close examination reveals some astonishing characteristics. The top of this block, although weathered from millennia in the desert, has clearly been cut by a blade that has a very distinctive circular arc to it. It left obvious striations and grooves in its passing, indicating a rapid rate of cutting through this very hard material, and a bit of water poured over the block shows these marks very clearly. The block appears to have not been cut all the way through, something that we are very fortunate to have evidence for, as it also appears to have been a remarkably thin edge, only a few millimeters of material, as evidenced by the lip that is left on the edge of this block. Look at the arc to the saw and just try to imagine the diameter of the tool. If it was indeed a circular saw, it may have been as much as 8 or 9 meters, or 25 feet or more in diameter. Some saw cuts that left precise arcs have been estimated by Christopher Dunn to have been made with saws up to 11 meters in diameter, which is over 30 feet. Primitive hand tools made from copper indeed. I think this particular block was never quite finished, and it seems likely to me that many of the other basalt blocks that form part of the megalithic floors and walls on this site were likely cut in a similar fashion, and then they were polished to an astonishing level of flatness, which removed the grooves and the striation marks from the cut. These types of large diameter saws were also used on many other blocks at Abu Sir, and we see their markings in many other places. At Giza and on other sites, we have actual saw cuts that were started and not finished. The basalt floor to the east of the Great Pyramid has several such marks made into it. A close examination of the granite box inside the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid also reveals the striations and markings of great saws that were used to cut and shape it. Look.
Come on, give me the friggin' image.
For the flat surfaces on the top of this box inside the King's Chamber, and also the faint lines that indicate the machining process that are etched into the side of this box as you enjoy the just epic resonance in this amazing room. These giant saws were obviously also used to cut the lids from the same original block of stone that the boxes themselves were shaped from. And in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, there is what's known as the unfinished box. It has a huge saw cut showing how the lid was being removed from the back of the stone block. I've also seen photos of circular saw marks made into stone at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku in Bolivia, although I can't seem to find the photographs that I've seen of them despite searching around a fair bit. Maybe you guys can help me out in the comments section below and point me to some of these examples. It's certainly something that I'll be looking for the next time I get to visit that incredible place. And just as a reminder, using circular saws like this isn't the typical way any civilization quarries stone, right up until we get into the modern mechanized age. In these days we do indeed use huge circular saws or swing saws or other types of mechanized saws in order to cut granite, but until barely 100 years ago, the technique used in the field to cut through granite was far different and far more primitive. We see these primitive quarrying marks everywhere, as the ancient Egyptian stone monuments have been used as quarries for millennia now. Small hollows are first carved into the rock, usually with steel chisels, and it forms something that looks kind of like a dashed line. You'll see this all over Egyptian sites and on many of the blocks. After this line is carved, wood is inserted into these gaps, and then the wood is wet. The wood expands, the block cracks, hopefully it cracks along the quarry line itself, and there you go, you have yourself a piece of granite. The circular saw marks that have quite clearly been used to cut large blocks of stone don't match any technique known from the ancient world, but they certainly seem to indicate some form of mechanized capability, much like our own. When we see these marks, there is really no mainstream explanation for how they were made in antiquity, other than with the idea of some form of two-man copper or bronze saw being pushed back and forth by a couple of guys using sand or some other abrasive material to slowly, very slowly, grind through the stone. Although this technique will indeed eventually wear away the stone, it's more of a grinding motion than a cutting mechanism, and there are really several problems with the idea that this type of saw made these types of marks. Firstly, the obvious one, it doesn't leave anything like the marks that we find on blocks like the one at Abu Sir, as it's a grinding process, not a cutting process like we see on this block. These marks are all consistent in terms of their radius. This tool wasn't moved around very much in relation to the block. Everything seems to have been held very firmly as the saw progressed through the cut. The very tiny width of the blade, as indicated by the lip at the edge of this cut, makes it nothing short of impossible that such a saw could have been made from a soft material like copper or bronze and still manage to cut through basalt. Then there's the obvious problems. It would simply take far too long to grind through all of these blocks in this way, and many of the blocks that seem to have been cut in this manner are way too large to have been done by hand with primitive tools like copper saws. While this basalt block here at Abu Sir isn't itself that large, consider trying to saw or grind through something that is 10, 11, or up to 20 feet long, or even longer, like the large granite slabs that are in the Great Pyramid, or the great boxes of the Serapeum, and you can quickly see the issues with the idea of doing this type of thing by hand with copper saws. The most befuddling evidence for some form of advanced machining comes from a notorious slab of granite that's found at the Old Kingdom site of Abu Rawash. It has the same circular saw marks, these circular grooves that we saw on the basalt block at Abu Sir, but it also seems to have been subjected to at least a two-stage machining process. The saw has been used to cut horizontally into the block as we're viewing it in this footage, and it left the same saw cut marks as we saw on the block at Abu Sir. However, it also has a machined lip that's been cut vertically into this cut surface, as if a very large circular saw or wheel was used to cut just a small amount out vertically, shown by this slight yet consistent concave arc to this second cut. This is a very complex mechanical signature. It's not something that could have been made with hand tools, and frankly it bends my mind a little bit trying to imagine just how this series of cuts were made. Christopher Dunn has made an excellent study of this block at Abu Rawash, along with the other evidence for mega machines in his book Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. I plan to produce more detailed investigations into the specifics of these circular saw markings sometime in the future, and give it a treatment much like I have done for the tube drills, but my intent in this video is to cover a wide breadth of examples for high technology, and to try to not get too lost in the details. Speaking of tube drills, or core drills, they're yet another example of machining marks that are not explainable by the tools or techniques in the archaeological record. Yet again, here we have evidence for advanced tools that seem to have cut through tough material like granite at a rate far greater than we could achieve even in modern times. And if you'd like some clarification of that claim, please do watch the documentary about it on my channel. There's a link below. I will add that we do see evidence for core drills or tube drills in other parts of the world, notably South America. Although not a common find, there are many examples of large core drill blocks and holes in the andesite and granite of structures like the Coricancha in Cusco. I've seen reports and images of holes drilled into stone from around the world, including some from Europe, and I think that all of these examples could benefit from LiDAR or hyperspectral imaging tests in order to help uncover their secrets. Even at Pumapunku, which is a site we'll get into in this second video, there are many examples of tiny little drill holes pushed into the andesite. These may not have been core drill holes, but they're remarkable in their precision and in their almost delicate placing nonetheless. At the other end of the scale, some of these tube drill diameters seem almost impossibly large, certainly way too large to even consider doing it by hand. Something like this incredible coffer that's housed in the Egyptian Museum with 4 just massive tube drill holes drilled into it. These tube drills have also been used to make some very complex objects, like this one, which is a tube drill hole that's been drilled into a core from a larger tube drill, which is also housed in a museum. This block that's being shown by Yusuf Ayawan was, at least last time we saw it, located at Giza. It's another example of a hole drilled into a larger piece that may actually be something from another tube drill. But sadly, this block is now missing. It's no longer at Giza, at least we couldn't find it. And this is an all too common occurrence for evidence that doesn't really fit the mainstream narrative. Using manpower alone and manual hand tools like pounding stones or copper saws and chisels, it takes literally days of effort to grind away a very small amount of material in the very hard stone types like granite or diorite. Why then do we find clear evidence for overcuts in so many objects and slabs? We find these overcuts on the precision statues of ancient Egypt. You can find these overcuts under the arms or at the edge of the seat. You also tend to see tube drill holes drilled between the feet. There are other machining marks that seem to indicate some form of powerful industrial process was used to shape and finish the stone. One of the best examples is this remarkable slab tucked away in a corner at Abu Sir that has many such markings on it. Blades or saws have dipped into the material and then backed out, and cuts have been adjusted. I can only describe this block as having been machined. It's very flat, its corners and angles are very precise, and there are power tool markings all over it that seem almost delicate in their application. Even the end of this slab appears to have been cut through, and then you can see where the stone was broken away.
So crazy,
and just look at the flatness of the surfaces and the sharpness of the angles. I really hope this slab is left where it is. It seems small enough that it could be relatively easily carried away, and I'm looking forward to examining it one more time when we visit Abu Sir again later this year. There's one other dimension to machining that I want to cover, and it's something that I've talked about before. That is the polishing or the finishing of precision-made stone objects. Once again, we're talking primarily about the boxes and the statues. In many cases, the stone has been worked to a point of reflecting light, which is not a natural characteristic for granodiorite or other hard stones. It needs to be worked extensively to get it to this point. There appears to be several stages of finishing that's required in order to get to this mirror-like finish, and this process is best illustrated by the mighty single-piece boxes that are housed in the underground catacombs of the Serapeum of Saqqara. While most of these giant 24 boxes have been finished to a almost mirror polish, there are several that show various stages of polishing, which makes the whole complex all the more remarkable because it indicates that this finishing work was likely done in situ, underground, and in very tight quarters. This giant black granite box, one of the biggest boxes in the complex, complete with its massive lid, it's tucked away in a corner that's generally off limits to the public, and it has been precisely made but not quite finished, perhaps because it developed a large crack in the end here. This box shows the rough machining stage of work, which was then followed by a much finer process that then flattened the surface but didn't actually polish it.
The lid almost reached a very final stage of smoothing. Yeah. So all you needed after this level is to smooth it, and then again look at that.
This nearly polished stage of finishing can also be seen on the undersides of the lids of the other boxes, or on other surfaces of the boxes that were never meant to be fully polished. And a careful examination reveals some very fine lines or some markings from some form of tool that must have been used at this stage.
Here also we have other machining, probably the latest layer. We saw how the rough machining reached a certain point. We have more machining here, look at it here. Fine lines. If you can bring it with your camera. You see there are fine lines.
Yeah.
You see it?
Yes.
That looks like the final
Yo, what's up, buddy?
You can see
I'm about to ride my bike, but I can text and talk.
Then, lastly, we have the actual polishing stage that brings the material to the point of reflecting light. Even while covered in dust, the perfect nature of the finish on these boxes really is remarkable, particularly in some of the interior spaces in the boxes, which appear to have been polished almost perfectly. If you've seen my Serapeum series, you'll know that there is some astonishing evidence that a liquid may have been used to achieve this finish. You can see the markings left by what appear to be liquid drops on the underside of the lid here.
A liquid, some kind of liquid. So the liquid leaks down here and then forms these lines with drops.
Now, this isn't a varnish or a polish, at least as not as we know them, and many people have suggested this to me. That's not what this is, because these liquid pooling marks that are shown here, they are noticeably smoother than the surrounding material. This is not a process nor a chemical that we know of. Our granite blocks and the slabs that we use are polished with mechanical devices and varying levels of grit before they're shipped to your house and installed as a kitchen counter. Now, the orthodox explanation for this polishing is, of course, cast in the light of the primitive capabilities of the ancient Egyptians. Academics claim that this polishing was done simply by rubbing sand and rocks onto the surface. While this seems fairly ridiculous, this might actually be a plausible technique for polishing a flat surface, never mind how you got the surface flat in the first place. But even if it took years to achieve, it just isn't realistic when you consider the vast array of non-flat surfaces. There are many complex, irregular surfaces that are on these objects that have been polished just as well as the flat parts. It's not just the boxes that are polished. We also see a very fine degree of finishing in evidence on many statues. Plenty of these are housed today in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and many of them are made from types of stone that are even harder than granite. Note how every surface is polished, and in some cases the reflection of light is used to emphasize features, like the rib cage on this statue, or the chest of this seated figure. The inside of the fingernails are polished, the artistic lotus flower motif on the side of the throne here is polished, and this polished finish, which when shown next to the writing, shows us one of the hugely obvious contradiction when it comes to the varying level of technologies that we observe in ancient Egypt. The technology reflected in the writing on this statue does not remotely reflect the technology that was used to make the statue itself. It doesn't even come close. This is one of those things that once you see it, you can't easily unsee it because you start to notice it everywhere. The glyphs carved into these objects display the signature and the marks that handheld chisels leave when used on stone in a manner like this. Compared to the object itself, the writing is generally always pretty rough work. The builders obviously had the ability to polish any surface at any angle, as I've just shown, yet the writings are never polished, even in large symbols with plenty of space. Look at this box, for example. Although it's heavily weathered, you can still see the light that reflects from its surface. Yet, despite it being utterly covered in hieroglyphs, you can see the obvious hand tool nature of the work and how the writings were made by chipping away at the polished stone. Look at the writing on this box in the Serapeum. We've looked at it before, but I like to make the point that if the builders could make perfectly straight lines in the object itself, they could make perfectly square corners like those seen on the interior. Why then couldn't they manage to draw a straight line on the outside of the box? The simplest answer is because the writing most likely came later and was done by a civilization that lacked the same capability to work the stone.
Why we cannot accept it? Because of the perfection of machining. You cannot be the one who do this. The thing that would challenge the engineers today, and then you will be challenged just by adding the writings on. Especially that we have seen many good examples of dynastic Egyptians relief and deep relief and high relief, superior writings. And we know the process of it and we know the tools. And in my opinion, as a stone carver and as someone who's been studying this, I haven't seen really any writings in the hieroglyphics, even the best quality ones, which I love so much, relief or high relief or deep relief, that reflects power tools. I have seen it in statues and in boxes and in slabs, but I haven't seen it yet in any writings. I know how it was done. It was done manually.
This is my friend Yusuf Ayawan. He's a master stonemason, a chematologist, and the son of the legendary indigenous wisdom keeper Hakim El Ayawan, and he's been studying these objects and ancient Egypt his entire life. He understands in a way that few do what it really takes to work in and carve stone, both by hand and with power tools, and he really knows what he's talking about. I greatly respect his perspective and his knowledge, and I agree with him when it comes to the technology level that we see in the writing. There's some nuance here to explain. The dynastic Egyptian civilization lasted a very long time, many thousands of years. They eventually developed iron tools, and although this was long after the Old Kingdom, they certainly developed the ability to do very fine work into hard stone. I'd imagine that being a scribe or a stone carver and writing hieroglyphs was a lifelong trade and would have taken decades of training to become truly proficient. This proficiency in writing extended even to erasing old glyphs and replacing them. This process is well demonstrated by an example here at Tanis on this obelisk fragment. See how the bird glyph is being blended into the writing? I think that this is why Ramses II seems to have had his name on everything. Once he tagged it, it was his forever, and we still attribute endless statues and monuments to him, while I think the truth is more likely that he was just the last guy to write his name on something that was vastly more ancient. Undoubtedly, some of the carving that's been done into obelisks and statues is really excellent work. It looks very sharp and well defined, particularly on obelisks like this example at Karnak Temple. However, as Yusuf said, even with these examples, he knows how it was done, and it was done with hand tools. He's lived and travelled in Egypt his whole life, and he's never seen any writing that reflects machining or the use of power tools. We do, however, see this evidence on the objects themselves, on the boxes, on the slabs, on the columns, the obelisks, and on the statues. The writing is, without fail, always used to date the sites and to date the objects that are found on the sites, despite in many cases there being a huge disparity in technology levels. How could anyone say that these poorly made scratches into this incredible box at the Serapeum were made by the same people that made the box itself? Yet this is exactly how we date and relate this site and its objects. At the Serapeum, this box is considered to be the most valuable because it has writing on it. I would prefer to call this what it is, a priceless, high-technology, ancient object that was inherited and then vandalized with a chisel by a later and far less capable ancient culture. Maybe it's high time that we opened our eyes and used some of our own high-technology capability in order to reevaluate these ancient places, so that we might get just a few steps closer to the truth. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 of this series will be the very next video that I produce, and in it we'll continue this investigation by taking a look at some of the logistics and construction methodologies around moving some of the really big, heavy stuff. We'll also take a look at what I think is the most convincing aspect of ancient high technology, which is precision. We're going to get into all of the little vases, the symmetry in the stone vases, the columns, the boxes, the obelisks, the various aspects of precision that are both measurable and quite evident. In that that video, I'll also give you my opinion on what it is that I think we're really looking at here when we look at all of this high technology and precision objects that are mixed up in kind of the rougher and less precise work from other ancient civilizations. I do want to take a minute to just say a huge thank you to everybody that does support the channel via the value for value model. It means a lot to me. It's the only reason that I'm able to take the time to make and edit these videos, whether you're doing that through Patreon, PayPal, Subscribestar. There's a bunch of ways that you can do it. They're all listed out on unchartedx.com/support. I also wanted to say a big thank you to Stephanie, channel patron Stephanie, for designing the new logo. I really dig it. I've put it on a bunch of new merchandise. I'm using it in the videos, as you can tell. And yeah, that's great. I'm not that talented in an artistic direction, so it was great to get some help there. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers. Hello everyone, and welcome to Uncharted X. My name is Ben, and this is part 2 of my series looking at the evidence for forms of ancient high technology. Part 1 is worth a watch before this if you haven't seen it already. In that video, we set up some of the context around these claims for ancient high technology, how they correlate to the story of history as we know it, and then we dived into the evidence for ancient machining and polishing. In this video, we're going to look at another category of evidence for ancient high technology, the one that I think is the most convincing, that of precision. The nature of precision bears some explanation, as while it's a word we all know and hear pretty frequently, it certainly gets used constantly as a marketing term, precision this or precision that. It's a concept with some really far-reaching consequences. Our entire modern world is built on precision. We are constantly surrounded by its application, from the engines in our cars and the aircraft that we fly in, to the electronics that are omnipresent in every single device that we use, watch, or interact with. Without it, modern civilization simply wouldn't exist. Our way of life is the direct result of the relentless pursuit of precision. These days, we take the benefits of precision for granted. For example, the mass-produced and pervasive semiconductor microchips that are in all of our devices, from dishwashers to phones and computers. These all contain millions of transistors that are packaged in tiny, power-efficient silicon footprints. These tiny transistors are assembled in a process that's measured on the nanometer scale, which is to say measured in the billionths of meters. And yes, that's billion with a B. The width of a helium atom is measurable on this scale, coming in at around 0.06 of 1 nanometer. I recently read a book called The Perfectionists: How Precision Engineers Created the Modern World, written by Simon Winchester. It was recommended to me by Philip Adams in a brief email discussing the precision of the Serapeum. In this book, Winchester describes the rise of the modern pursuit of precision, beginning with its origins in the 18th century in England with the birth of accurate chronometers and developments in cannon manufacturing for the Navy, and also in the progression of the steam piston engine. All of a sudden, it started to become very important to be able to manufacture precision surfaces with low tolerances, like pistons and cylinders, such that pressurized steam didn't just leak out and could be made to do actual work. It also turns out that when the barrels of cannons are accurately bored out and rifled, which requires both the solid cast cannon and the tool that's boring it out to be held rigidly in place, they are far less prone to exploding randomly and far more likely to shoot straight. Before this development, naval cannons were made by casting the molten iron into its rough shape, including the hollow space for the barrel, and then they would fire the cannon while it was still cooling and pretty much just hope for the best. It was in small but significant leaps like this that modern precision manufacturing was born. From this point on, precision drove the Industrial Revolution, and its applications seemed endless. Modern engines are much more powerful and compact today, thanks to the precise flatness of cylinder heads and the low tolerances of pistons, rings, and bores, as well as the mechanical precision of all of their other parts. We enjoy the godlike ability to travel halfway around the world in a matter of hours by zipping through the stratosphere at nearly the speed of sound, even though we often complain bitterly about it, all thanks to precision. Mankind has the ability to send humans into space without instant death, and to even bring them back again, all thanks to precision. Modern firearms rely on precision-made parts and ammunition, as before we developed this capability, gun parts were handmade and had to be hand-filed to fit individual weapons. Before this, misfires, jams, or malfunctions were very common, although on the positive side, I suppose wars were probably a lot harder to fight back then. Ultimately, the application of precision in warfare led to the development of nuclear weapons, and now us talking monkeys have the ability to uncork Armageddon without the assistance of any space rocks or burps from the sun, so I guess it's not all good news. Clocks, watches, and other mechanical devices got smaller and more accurate, and eventually the microelectronic and semiconductor industries were born. Our civilization progressed from measuring precision in units of tenths of inches in the 1700s, right down to the nanotechnology of today that can be measured by the diameter of individual atoms. Why did we do this? Why did we go to all of the trouble, expense, and effort to develop and keep pushing back the boundaries of precision? This question may seem obvious, but it reveals one of the fundamental aspects of precision, and that is its relationship to function. We develop these expensive capabilities because they gain us notable functional benefits in their application. Inventing their capability to create hard surfaces that are perfectly flat to within 1/20th the width of a human hair is a difficult and expensive thing to do. Developing the capability to even measure such precision is equally expensive, if not more so. It requires calibration, and none of it comes naturally to us. You can't see this level of precision with your eye, you can't feel it with your hand. You need sophisticated, calibrated, and expensive metrology instruments in order to do so. We simply don't create precision manufacturing capability to this level for any other reason than function. We don't develop it for ceremonial purposes, nor do we develop it for artistic reasons. However, once we have this type of precision manufacturing capability, it can be applied to all sorts of end products. Just consider a couple of examples from the modern age. Take the reductive process like 3D CNC milling machines, or an additive process like 3D printing. Whether we are making artwork or machine parts, it's the process itself that provides the precision. The process was developed in the first place so that we could gain the functional benefits of that precision, but then we can apply it to pretty much anything we want to do with the process. And this is an important point to remember when we're looking at the precision that's evident in some ancient objects, as some of these precision ancient objects appear more functional than others. So keep this point in mind as we go through the examples. Overall, I enjoyed Simon Winchester's book, as it certainly makes the case for precision forming the backbone of the modern world. One thing that I mildly disagreed with was the notion that the concept and practice of precision only began in the 18th century. I think it would be more accurate to say instead that the practice was restarted in the 18th century, or that the concept was only rediscovered at that time by modern man, as it seems clear that at some point ancient man had a pretty damn good grip on the concept and application of precision as well. Although this isn't something that you will often see or hear discussed by orthodox archaeologists, there is tremendous evidence for very high degrees of precision in many of the vastly ancient stone objects and architecture all around the world. Some of these objects display a level of precision that simply could not have been accidental, and by its very nature required sophisticated tools and highly advanced knowledge and capability in order to achieve. Although we find neither sophisticated tools in the archaeological record, nor any records of advanced capability in what we know of ancient civilizations, the proof that both existed at some point in the past is incontrovertible. The results of sophisticated tools and the results of these processes are still sitting right in front of our eyes in the megalithic objects and architecture that puzzle and captivate so many people from all around the world. Perhaps the best example of measured ancient precision is found in a place that I've talked about extensively on this channel, the Serapeum of Saqqara. In terms of smoking gun evidence for ancient high technology, this underground labyrinth and its 24 huge megalithic boxes is really at the top of the list. The precision of these mighty single-piece boxes and their lids, some of which weigh up to 100 tons, is measured in straight lines, in flat surfaces, and in the perfect squareness of corners and relative faces. These are easily understood dimensions of precision, and it's a good place to start our investigation, as we'll move on to the more complex evidence of compound curved surfaces and three-dimensional proportions of objects like the tiny stone jars and the giant granite statues afterwards. I have a 5-part series of videos dedicated to the Serapeum that's on my channel, so I'll be brief here, but if you haven't seen them, please do check out the Serapeum playlist. The link is below in the description. Using a calibrated and expensive precision straight edge, manufacturing engineer Chris Dunn has measured the inside surfaces of a couple of these boxes to be precisely and absolutely flat, to within 1/20th the width of a human hair, or 0.0001 inches, which is the limit of his straight edge. Wherever he moved this straight edge over the flat, mirror-like interior walls of the box, light did not pass underneath it, which it would have if the surface was not perfectly flat. Using a precision square, calibrated to within 5/100,000ths of an inch, or 0.00005 inches, he found the inside faces of the boxes to not only be perfectly square and parallel to each other, but also perfectly square relative to the lid. This is a profound achievement. Remember that this all has been done in massive single-piece granite boxes. These aren't separate pieces of granite that are then bolted together, which is how we might construct something like this today. And one single mistake anywhere would mean that you need to change the entire geometry of the box. The complexity and difficulty of getting this feat perfectly correct, particularly in faces up to 10 feet apart, really can't be overstated. Now, not only was this done perfectly for one box, it appears to be a feat repeated time and time again across many of these boxes. Quoting Christopher Dunn from his article, The Amazing Boxes of the Serapeum, which you can find on his website at gizapower.com, quote, "Think of it as a geometric reality. In order for the lid to be square with the two inside walls, the inside walls would have to be parallel to one another along the vertical axis. Moreover, the top side of the box would need to establish a plane that is square to the sides. That makes finishing the inside exponentially more difficult. The manufacturers of these boxes in the Serapeum not only created inside surfaces that were flat when measured vertically and horizontally, they also made sure that the surfaces they were creating were square and parallel to each other, with one surface, the top, having sides that are 5 feet and 10 feet apart from each other. But without such parallelism and squareness of the top surface, the squareness noted on both sides would not exist. While it may be argued that modern man cannot impose a modern perspective on artifacts that are thousands of years old, an appreciation of the level of precision found in these artifacts is lacking in archaeological literature and is only revealed by an understanding of what it takes to produce this kind of work. As an engineer and craftsman who has worked in manufacturing for over 40 years and who has created precision artifacts in our modern world, in my opinion, this accomplishment in prehistory deserves more recognition. Nobody does this kind of work unless there is a very high purpose for the artifact. Even the concept of this type of precision does not occur to an artisan unless there is no other means of accomplishing what the artifact is intended to do. The only other reason that such precision would be created in an object would be that the tools that are used to create it are so precise that they are incapable of producing anything less than precision. With either scenario, we are looking at a higher civilization in prehistory than what is currently accepted. To me, the implications are staggering. This is why I believe that these artifacts that I have measured in Egypt are the smoking gun that proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that a higher civilization than what we have been taught existed in ancient Egypt. The evidence is cut into the stone." End quote. The Serapeum isn't the only place that one can find precision stone boxes. They're found in many pyramids and in so-called temples, as well as in other underground galleries and tunnel systems like those in the Valley of the Kings. The Egyptian Museum also has many examples of precision boxes that have been recovered from all over Egypt. The best and biggest of these boxes, however, are still down here in the Serapeum, probably because they're basically impossible to move around down here in these confined spaces, the logistics of which is a topic we'll get into later in this series, as it's also a pretty clear form of evidence for ancient high technology. The Serapeum boxes are also, at least to my knowledge, the only boxes that have been measured and tested, at least to some degree, for aspects of high precision. That analysis was done by Christopher Dunn on his own initiative, and even then was only performed on a couple of the boxes in the Serapeum and not on all of them. While many of the other precision boxes seem to have very similar characteristics to those in the Serapeum, I can't find any evidence that they've ever been tested this way, even by the relatively rudimentary testing that you can do with handheld precision straight edges, squares, and corner radius dies. I think this fact speaks volumes about the motives of the academics and the institutions that control the access to and the research funding for sites and artifacts like these. They just don't seem to be that interested, yet there are and have been for years now several non-invasive techniques and tests that could easily be deployed in order to learn much more about the true nature of ancient precision that we can see in these objects. Handheld precision tools would be a start, but more modern, laser-based metrology tools could be used to determine the dimensions and tolerances over the entire surface of these artifacts. High-definition LiDAR-based 3D scanning, or the emerging field of hyperspectral imaging, could be used to dramatically advance our understanding of the exact nature of precision and the construction methods that we use to manufacture boxes like these. Not only boxes, but these techniques could and should be used to model and study many of the precision objects and architecture that are found around the world. It's worth noting that when you look at the various boxes in Egypt, there is also strong evidence for multiple levels of technological capability. Although they're always uniformly labelled as sarcophagi, whether it's for people or for bulls, there always seems to be two types of boxes. There are the precision-made ones with straight lines, sharp corners, flat and polished surfaces, and then there are the clearly handmade boxes, which are imperfectly done and still display chisel and hammer dressing marks. Although this isn't always the case, in general, the poor quality boxes tend to come from the later periods, with the precision boxes being attributed to the older and earlier periods. Even the oldest box known, an 8-ton single piece of granite that is under Mastaba 17 at Maidun, appears to be a precision-made box, and it's not something that's been roughly carved by hand. We have here examples of the same backwards progression of technological capability, the same contradiction in the story of history that is demonstrated in general by the Old Kingdom of Egypt when it's held up relative to the rest of the Egyptian civilization. If we can't explain how the dynastic Egyptians made these boxes with what we know of their primitive capabilities or with the tools that we have in the archaeological record, does it not make more sense that they might have inherited these objects? They might have used them for ceremony and imitated them. They might have tried to create their own boxes, ones that are explainable by their tools and are explainable with their known capabilities. Here at the site of Tanis, you have the two types of boxes actually lined up side by side. One is clearly precision made and the other is obviously not. They reflect vastly different levels of capability and technology, and only one of these matches what we know about the tools and techniques of the dynastic Egyptians. Before I move on, I do want to take a minute to acknowledge and thank Christopher Dunn for his contribution to the world in this field. His book, Lost technologies of ancient Egypt is,
we are done
in
for
my
today.
opinion, incredibly important work, and I think that it will be widely recognized as such in years to
Pretty
come.
good session.
So we've established that while precision seems to have existed deep in the past, it's only something that our civilization has recently developed and then put to significant use over the last 200 to 300
Oh, I'm
years.
tired.
The fact is that it wasn't until
very
after
tired.
we had begun our own modern voyage down the path of precision that we even had the capability to notice and accurately measure ancient forms of precision, or to even appreciate the sophistication
Thank you
of
for
the
being here.
manufacturing
I appreciate
techniques
it.
that were required
Thanks,
to achieve
Bara.
it.
Thank you.
This evidence has been sitting in front of humanity for thousands of years, like some
messed up
sort
your
of
name.
coded message sent down through time.
I'm going to sign off now, but thank you for being here. I really appreciate it very much.
To read. Sir William Flinders Petrie was
Thank
one
you,
of the very
appreciate it.
first to apply our civilization's knowledge of precision
I will.
and manufacturing to the
I
objects
hope to
of
stream
ancient
Goldeneye
Egypt.
tomorrow.
And he did so to various degrees across his work through the
I finally got the
1800s
Japanese
and
card. I
early
unlocked
1900s.
all the way up to
He
Aztec,
observed
so
and quantified the drilling
haven't played
and
Aztec on
machining marks
Japanese
that
yet,
are left
but
in artifacts,
let's
and he measured and speculated
let's see
on the
tomorrow. I might have to do
techniques
an
required
emergency
manufacture
root
the
canal.
many ancient stone vases and vessels that come from the
So let's
oldest
see.
times of ancient Egypt. These stone jars,
Alright.
bowls, or other objects are truly remarkable
being here.
pieces that, by
Appreciate
their
it very
very
much.
nature, provide
Bye.
proof that advanced
See you later. See you,
manufacturing
Bara. See you,
techniques
everyone.
and
Bye.
precision were alive and well deep